Good evening, everybody. Greg Pruitt here with the Idaho Dispatch. And rather than try to write out a very long article on the recap of what happened today in the Bundy and Von Schmidt trial, I figured we'd do a video kind of recapping the events of today and then get into what to expect tomorrow. And then we will post an article, but it'll just be a brief paragraph along with this video that you guys can share. So we are now on day 3 of the Bundy and Von Schmidt trial, for those that don't know. And just kind of recapping real quick, this is a trial that stemmed from an event that happened on August 25th of last year at the Capitol, where Bundy and Von Schmidt were both arrested and charged with trespassing, and Bundy is facing an additional charge of, sorry, I'm getting over to our page here so I can hopefully see comments. Bundy is facing an additional charge of resisting arrest. So if you guys can hear me okay, be sure to let me know. And with that, the day 3 recap is that the prosecution the state called their last witness, which was Speaker Scott Bedke. He is the House Speaker, and he was the one that testified first thing this morning. And a lot of the testimony really throughout the trial and really throughout today especially seemed to hone in on several things. And first, for at least from what we noticed in watching the trial, so for those that don't know, we're not in the courtroom while this is happening. We are watching online on Judge David Manweiler's YouTube channel, just like all of you are if you are watching the trial. And a lot of what has transpired seems to be honed in on the authority that Speaker Scott Bedke has or does not have, and somewhat of what the statute says about trespassing, and what time and in what portions of the Capitol are open or not open. Okay, so from both the state's perspective on the trespassing issue in particular, and the defense's perspective, that's what they both seem to be honing in on. Now, I say all this with a caveat in that, we haven't talked to the defense or the prosecution right now, and they wouldn't discuss the case, obviously, until it's over. And so we're just kind of giving you our observations of what a lot of the questions have resolved around, because I don't think any of you are going to go listen to all, 3 days of trial if you haven't been following so far. So I'm trying to recap as best as I can everything that has happened up until this point. So with Speaker Bedke, there was a lot of discussion about some of the House rules, okay, some of those rules written, and whether or not those rules give him the authority to clear a room. And what Speaker Bedke brought up and what the state was trying to say from their perspective was that Speaker Bedke has the ability to clear the room, and Speaker Bedke said that once the hearing is complete, they have the ability to kind of clear that room once the business is complete. And the defense in crossing Bedke and then with their own witnesses have said that the Capitol is open until 7 p.m. That was the listed hours on August 25th, was 7 o'clock p.m. And then there was kind of an interesting discussion and somewhat of a contradiction between what Speaker Bedke was saying and then what 2 legislators who testified on the defense's behalf had said. And that revolved around the Lincoln Auditorium and whether or not that was open or closed on that day, and whether it's typically open or closed prior when there's no hearing taking place. And so if you've never been to the Capitol, there's a whole bunch of hearing rooms on the garden level, which is the bottom floor, okay? And a lot of those rooms are relatively small in the audience capacity, and so if they anticipate a bigger audience, then they'll move everybody to the Lincoln Auditorium, and the Lincoln Auditorium is where we're having this debate and this trial over, is what took place in the Lincoln Auditorium. And I don't remember the capacity, 80 to 100 maybe, if I had to guess. It's significantly larger than the other rooms. And so Speaker Bedke seemed to indicate, and I can't recall exactly whether he was saying what the current situation of the Lincoln Auditorium was or if it was from that day. But he seemed to indicate that it was closed and it's always locked unless there's a hearing or unless somebody gets permission to go inside. And so, from my own recollection, and this doesn't bear anything on the trial in either direction necessarily, just from my own recollection and having been to the Capitol a lot, everything has kind of changed over the years at the Capitol. When I started doing political stuff at the Capitol in 2012, you could actually go into all of the hearing rooms, whether there was a hearing occurring or not. The doors were unlocked, and you could go into the state legislative offices. So you could actually walk out of the hallway into the back where the legislators were, and you could talk to them. And then several years later, they locked the legislative offices, and then you had to have a key to get in, or you had to have an appointment to get back there. And then I don't know at what time or which year they locked the regular hearing rooms. And then you couldn't get into the hearing rooms, because I used to go into those hearing rooms as well, and you would just have a little meeting with somebody real quick if it was empty and they weren't having a hearing at the time. The Lincoln Auditorium, according to Senator Christy Zito, who testified today, as well as Representative Judy Boyle, was that the Lincoln Auditorium is always open. As long as the building is open, that the Lincoln Auditorium was open. Either the doors are propped open, or you can at least just walk in there. One of the state's other witnesses, Diego Rodriguez, testified that on sometime in June, okay, so this would have been a couple months prior to the events in August. I believe it said June 23rd. I could be mistaken on that, but about 2 months prior, that him and Ammon Bundy had gone. There was another attempted special session that was going to take place where some legislators were coming down, and so they went down, I think, a couple days before, to see where that might be held, and they said they were able to walk right into the Lincoln Auditorium during regular business hours, okay? And so that seems to be where a lot of the discussion is from the defense side. Is they seem to be asking a lot of questions and trying to show that the building was open and the Lincoln Auditorium was open, and if Ammon was arrested at 5:30, then he was arrested during a time in which he would have had access and therefore can't be trespassed. And the state is trying to say, yeah, even though Ammon was in the building during public hours, the Speaker of the House has the ability and the authority to remove somebody from that room if the business is closed for the day and the hearing is over and there's no more business being done in that room. That's all of the debate right now, at least on the trespassing issue. And then there's been some debate, and not much, on whether or not you can be trespassed from public property, and so there's been discussions about that. And then as far as the resisting arrest, so from what I remember the judge saying, and I'm an attorney, so I could be incorrect here, but from what I remember the judge saying, the charge is not just resisting arrest, it's resisting, obstructing, or delaying the arrest. And so if you guys have been paying attention, in the first 2 days, the state, the prosecutors, really spent a lot of time on talking about delay. And they would ask the officers, did he delay you? Did he delay you doing your job? Did he delay you doing your job? And they all said yes, from what I recollect. The defense is arguing that that Bundy, Von Schmidt, and another gal, Jill, I can't remember her last name. There was 3 people arrested that day, at least, or 4 actually, but I believe 3 of them were taken to Ada County for booking, that they all showed up at the jail at the same time. And so the defense is trying to say, well, your job wasn't delayed by Bundy because all of these people ended up at the same time and the other 2 were more cooperative. And so they've talked about that. They've talked about Bundy and whether or not he resisted. Several officers in the previous days had said that he did not actively resist. And again, I had a discussion with Bundy, Ammon Bundy, several months ago, and I asked him after the arrest, hey, why do you go dead weight? And his response was something to the effect of, well, I'm not going to help them arrest me for doing something that is in his words, a false arrest. I'm not going to help them do that, but I'm also not going to, punch them or kick them or hit them or do any of that kind of stuff. And so now we've kind of come to a point where, so you had Representative Boyle and Senator Zito that testified as a defense witness, and you had Diego Rodriguez that testified as a defense witness, and there was another defense witness. I can't remember her name. Another gal that testified as well. And so tomorrow, the anticipation is, and I'll get to Bundy's comments here in a minute, there will be one more witness, one more potential witness, I should say, because I don't know that there's been an official determination, but Representative Tammy Nichols, the defense is now trying to get her to come and testify as well. So those would be all the defense witnesses up until this point, at least, unless it continues on and goes in a different direction. So I believe after the other gal, and her name is escaping my mind, testified, then Ammon Bundy got up and testified as well. And, a lot of the discussion from the defense with him was his motivations, what he was trying to do, the point he was trying to make. They asked him if he'd do it all over again. He said he would. They asked him if he had any regrets for doing what he did. He said that he didn't. And, Ammon Bundy talked a lot about, the reasons for doing what he was doing was trying to, protect freedom and liberty and I'm trying to remember what else he said. Doing it for his family, and that, he'd rather be with his family, but he felt it was the right thing to do at the time. And so they went down that road. And then where we've left off is after the prosecution has been cross-examining Ammon for, 15 or 20 minutes up until the time that the judge called it for the day. And she kind of honed in on rules and whether or not Ammon felt that the officers had the authority to remove him, and whether Speaker Becky had the authority. And so it was kind of some interesting back and forth between the prosecution and Ammon, and how those questions were answered. The prosecution wanted some yes or no answers, and Ammon clearly did not want to answer some of those questions as yes or no, and didn't believe that he could, in his own words, answer some of those questions with a simple yes or no. He felt that they warranted more explanation, or that some of the prosecution's questions were inaccurate in how they were being asked. And so they were kind of going back and forth, and then there was some discussion about what happened the day before August 25th and some incidents that happened on the 24th. And this is really where it kind of started. The judge almost started getting frustrated with what was happening. And for those that don't know, once the jury was dismissed, the judge kind of was visibly and vocally upset that, about this back and forth about things that happened on the previous day. And so the question is, and what seems to be happening is, the judge in his order apparently was trying to tell them not to bring up things that happened on the 24th, the day before. And so both the defense and the prosecution kind of butted heads over what was being brought up, and if stuff is brought up from what happened the day before, that could lengthen the trial because of new potential witnesses and so forth. So, and I also forgot to mention during Bundy's testimony, he mentioned a number of times that he was restricted on what he could say in his responses, and so that may be in reference to what was happening on the 24th, or possibly after the 25th, or the day before the 24th. I'm not really sure yet. We haven't had a chance to ask him. So that is kind of a quick... Oh, somebody said Jill Watts. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't remember. Oh, yes, and Misty Gardner also testified that day, testified today at the Capitol. She was the one that was originally at the press table, her and Brian Bowermaster, and that's when Chairman Cheney, when they went to the press table after being told that was only for a credentialed press, accredited press, they went back to the table. That's when Chairman Cheney ended the meeting, and a bunch of chaos ensued. And then so once they left, once they arrested Brian, and Misty kind of went out in the hallway, I think, to talk to the police, Ammon at some point after that went and sat in that press area at that same table to kind of protest what was happening. And that's a really quick recap of where we are right now. And if you guys have any questions, be sure to let us know. The anticipation is that tomorrow the cross-examination and more than likely some redirects from the defense with Ammon Bundy will continue. That could go fairly lengthy for several hours, or it could go fairly quickly. We're not really sure. And then after Ammon is done, there will probably be a debate and a discussion over Representative Tammy Nichols and whether she is going to testify or not going to testify. And at that point, as far as we know right now, the trial would then be, or the defense would rest its case. They would make closing arguments, and then the jury deliberation would begin. And so that's kind of catching everybody up to where we are right now. If you have any questions, again, let us know in the comments. It's not meant to be a video encompassing the entire day and everything that was said, but we're just trying to give you a general recap of everything that we can from the events leading up until now. So tomorrow will be day 4. It looks like it will be over tomorrow, and all likelihood it will be over tomorrow, unless something goes totally awry. But yeah, so there's, again, for those that are just tuning in or you're not familiar, there are 2 charges against Ammon Bundy, 1 charge against Aaron Von Schmidt. Aaron Von Schmidt is is just facing the trespassing charge, and the prosecution doesn't seem to have spent a lot of time mentioning his name or talking about his specific situation. I mean, they have brought it up. They definitely seem more focused on the specifics of Bundy's 2 charges, and spent the first 2 days kind of going over some of the trespassing as well as whether or not he resisted. And I want to say the prosecution didn't even really mention resisting a whole lot. They appear to be going on a delay charge, and that he delayed the officers in doing their job because he was not actively helping them and cooperating with when they were arresting him. And so Ammon is facing that resist, obstructing, or delaying charge, and as well as the trespassing charge. And so the defense is trying to say that it was open to the public and there was really no authority for the speaker to do it. The trespassing charge isn't meant for public property, it's meant for private property, and that Ammon was in the building during a time when he was publicly allowed to be there because it was before 7 o'clock. So that's their perspective. The state is saying the charges stick. The Speaker of the House has authority to remove people from that room, and because they didn't leave. And one of the other things I guess the defense was saying in counter to the state's claim that Ammon had to leave was that there's something in the rule that talks about somebody that's a disturbance. And so there was some back and forth over, the defense is saying Ammon wasn't disturbing anybody, he wasn't hurting anybody, and the state is saying it doesn't matter. Once the people's business was done in that room, the speaker can essentially clear that room for any reason that he wants. Once the officers told him that he had to go, he didn't leave, and so therefore they charged him with trespassing. So I think I've tried to cover both sides' perspectives and what they've been arguing. And I may leave something out, but that's certainly not intentional. So, so Bob Thompson says Aaron Schmidt will get a chance tomorrow too. And I don't know if it was hard to hear. So there's some things that are hard to hear in the courtroom from the Zoom audio. But I don't know if Aaron is going to take the stand himself. He may. I don't recall. He is representing himself, so I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure how that works when you're representing yourself, because typically, if like in Ammon's case, Ammon takes the stand, and then his team gets to kind of plead their case and talk to Ammon in that way, and then the prosecution gets to cross-examine. If Aaron gets up there, I don't think he can ask himself questions, as far as I know. So he would definitely be subject to the cross-examination. And so Aaron will get a chance if he wants to testify. And it was hard to hear. I thought the judge had asked him at one point if he wanted to take the stand, but I couldn't hear the answer. And the only other thing we can't ever hear is if the attorney's asked to approach the bench. We can't hear that on the audio, what they're talking about. Now, sometimes they've approached the bench and the judge says, okay, jury, you need to leave because we need to have a little chat. And then they have a chat about whatever that topic is, so we certainly hear that. But yeah, it's been kind of an interesting trial so far. There are 6 jurors, and we'll have to see most likely tomorrow what their deliberations show and whether or not they come to an agreement on guilty or not guilty, or we have a hung jury. So anyway, that's all I've got for today, guys. I will likely do another video recap tomorrow of the entire trial if it is over tomorrow. And we appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to, we'd love to have you guys subscribe to our to the Idaho Dispatch to help support the efforts that we are bringing you to try and give you the most unbiased news that we can and try to give you perspectives from both sides. So you can go to idahodispatch.com/subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Other than that, we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will talk to you later.